G'day and greetings from the top of the world. I'm Max Martin. Now, we Australians enjoy a good game of strategy, trying to figure out the best route to avoid Sydney's peak hour traffic, or how to get a second round of access to that 89% annual discount offered by the sponsor of another YouTuber. That's two cases in point. For this time, we're going to navigate a game far grander and more intricate. The complex world of the Russian Orthodox Church in 2023 and their apparent reverence for Joseph Stalin. You might recall him from school or university history lectures where you scribbled down notes or sketched the lecturer's weird as tie. Joseph Stalin was a figure of immense power and paradox. Now, on the one hand, he was the orchestrator of Soviet industrialization and one of the driving forces behind Nazi Germany's defeat in World War II, after he changes sides to become the ally of the Allies, rather than their ally, of course, but their. Anyway. And then there's this. He also cast an indelible shadow by ordering hellish actions like the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocidal famine of 1932 and 33, the Great Purge or the Great Terror, Stalin's campaign to solidify his power over the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the state in 1937 and 1938, and the Gulag system, a system that started as a few forced labour camps inaugurated by the Soviet decree on April 15, 1919, undergoing a series of changes in the 1920s and ending up with the founding of the complete Gulag system under Stalin in 1930. Some call him an enigma, others a megalomaniacal genocidal maniac. As always, I invite you to make up your own mind. Just for now though, I'd like you to remember one number, 43. Let's leave it up here. Right. Now, let's add another layer to our woven tapestry. If you will, picture the Russian Orthodox Church considering granting our enigmatic Stalin the halo of sanctity. Elevating Stalin to sainthood. It's just an intellectual exercise, right? It's not headline news. But it's the sort of what if that piques the curiosity, isn't it? So now, take a look at this. A Russian Orthodox priest on the 18th of August 2023 blessing a giant newly erected statue of Stalin in the Pakov region of Russia. As we dive into this hypothetical exploration, let's sharpen our wits and broaden our horizons. Because sometimes the most fascinating journeys begin with the most straightforward of questions. What if? Let's start with a little bit of background about the man himself. The man known to history as Joseph Stalin didn't start his life with that name. He gave himself the moniker of Stalin in 1912. The name Stalin derives from the Russian word stal, which means steel. When translated, Stalin effectively meant man of steel. Superman. His birth name was Joseph Vissarionovich Yugashvili, and irony of ironies, he wasn't even Russian. He was born in a small one-room house in Georgi, Georgia on the 18th of December 1878. His father made and repaired shoes. His father was also often drunk and used to hit his wife and his son until his death in a fight in 1890. Joseph had smallpox when he was young, and this left his face scarred. This video isn't a biography of Stalin. If you want to learn more about the man, I'll leave a few links for good videos on YouTube in the description down below. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on his significant questionable choices. The Holodomor. The genocidal famine of Ukrainians in 1932 to 33, which at its height in June 33 claimed the lives of 28,000 people each day. Conservative estimates put the number of Ukrainians who perished from starvation at 7 million. The Great Purge. The Great Purge, or the Great Terror, was Stalin's campaign to solidify his power over the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the state. The purges were also designed to remove the remaining influence of Leon Trotsky and other prominent political rivals within the party. It occurred from August 1936 to March 1938. Unofficial estimates estimate the total number of Stalinism repression deaths in 1937 to 1938 at between 700,000 and 1.2 million. The Gulag system. Inaugurated by a Soviet decree on April 15, 1919, initially it started as a system of a few forced labour camps. It underwent administrative and organisational changes in the 1920s to the founding of the Gulag system proper, with 476 separate camp complexes by the end of 1930. The Gulag, as it was called then, had a total inmate population of about 100,000 in the late 1920s, when it underwent an enormous explosion coinciding with Stalin's Great Purge and the collectivisation of agriculture, which we'll get to later. By 1936, the Gulag held a total of 5 million prisoners, a number that was probably equalled or exceeded every subsequent year until Stalin died in 1953. We have no way of knowing accurately how many people died in the Gulag system, but I found conservative estimates in my research that put the number at least at 1.8 million. So, now let's put that number up on our list here. The Gulag was under the control of the secret police, the OGPU, later the NKVD, and then known as the KGB. They're still around today, you know that, didn't you? They changed their name a few times, but that's about it. Currently, they're known as the Federalnaya Federalnaya Sluzhba Bezopasnosti. Federalnaya Sluzhba Bezopasnosti. The Russian Federal Security Service, FSB for short. Now I'm sure you've heard that.
Ноги под себя поднял и встал.
Stalin's forced collectivization consolidated private property and individual farming into collective farms, the kolkhoz as it was known. This drastic transformation, often executed with force, aimed to boost agricultural productivity and strengthen state control, yet it led to widespread famine and strife, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of Soviet history. Now, surprise, surprise, no accurate figures of deaths in this period exist either, but in my digging, I came across a suggested figure. From 1930 until Stalin's death in 1953, 8 million. Deportations of ethnic groups is highly personal to me. This shadowy chapter of Stalinist policies orchestrated a sinister tapestry of forced deportations targeting various ethnic groups deemed untrustworthy or disloyal to the Soviet state. From the Crimean Tatars to my people, the Balts, Latvians with their brother Lithuanians and Estonians, amongst millions more, whole communities uprooted from their ancestral lands, herded into cattle cars and dispatched to distant, often inhospitable regions. Such actions were framed under the guise of strategic necessity, but in truth they were actually disgusting and murderous acts of ethnic cleansing. You see, the scars of this era, they resonate today. The present day Russian Federation is still doing this. Just look at the Ukrainian children that have been abducted from Ukraine. Classic case in point. I will be, or I would have already made a feature video about the abductee children. If it's up on my channel, I'll link it in the comments below. If it's not, it'll be up shortly. This is a testament to the profound human cost of ego-driven politics. Now, conservative numbers I've found for the Stalin era and subsequent deportation deaths and what they caused were, the number's pretty horrific. It's 23 million. One of the last things is World War II. Now, World War II, that's a bit tricky. Because while Nazi Germany initiated the war, some historians argue that certain decisions by Stalin before and during it, much like the Great Purge, took away many competent military officers, and that caused a considerably higher death rate and losses to the Soviet in the actual war field than ever should have happened. Now, the total Soviet military and civilian losses during World War II were estimated at over 20 million. Most of these resulted from the war and can't be directly attributed to Stalin's policies. But once again, I did some digging and I found a credible number that could be counted as Stalin's contribution to all of that. 2 million. So let's add that to our tally. Right, let's do some maths. Let's call it counting Stalin's dead conservatively. The Holodomor, Ukrainian famine, 1922 to 1923. Conservative estimates put the number of Ukrainians who perished from starvation at 7 million. Great Purge, 1936 to 1938. Estimates the total number of Stalinist repression deaths in 1930 to 1938 at between 700,000 and 1.2 million. There must have been more, but those numbers are for 1 year. So let's use the high one and presume that we're covering 1936 as well. So that's 1.2 million just for now. The Gulag labour counts, I found that at conservative being 1.8 million. So let's add that. Forced collectivization from 1930 until Stalin's death at 1953, 8 million, up you go. Now the deportations of ethnic groups in Stalin's time and subsequently through the rest, even though this happened in the Russian Empire and continues until present day, let's just look at the Stalin direct effect component, that's 23 million. And finally, Stalin's World War II. Directly attributable to Stalin's meddling, we know how Russian leaders, past and present, have always liked doing that. 2 million. Adding all that up, we get 43. 43 million deaths that can be proven to lay at Joseph Stalin, the man of steel's feet. Right. Suffice it to say that this guy makes Adolf Hitler look like a ranked amateur, doesn't he? Now remember, we're being conservative in our numbers too. Some call him an enigma. Yeah, right. Others call him a megalomaniacal genocidal maniac. Now, as always, make up your own mind. Now, if you remember just one thing from this video, remember the number 43. 43 million souls dead by Stalin's order. When you think of Russia, your mind might wander to vodka or bears or maybe even the vast expanse of Siberia. Let's dive a bit deeper into another side of Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church. And we're looking at it during the turbulent era of Joseph Stalin. The early 20th century was a whirlwind for Russia. The Bolsheviks, under the banner of communism, weren't precisely mates with the church. They saw religion as the opium of the people and viewed the Russian Orthodox Church with a fair bit of suspicion. Now, this wasn't just a passive distrust. Churches were destroyed, properties confiscated, and religious leaders persecuted, arrested, or worse. For the church, it seemed like their centuries-old influence was on the brink of destruction. Yeah. But then there was a twist of the tale. World War II. As Nazi Germany advanced, the USSR needed all hands on deck, including those that held the cross. Suddenly, it all shifted. Stalin recognized a political ally in the church. So you think it was a miracle, right? Well, the church, once persecuted, now played a crucial role in the war effort. Patriotic sermons echoed, priests blessed soldiers heading to the front, and religious processions suddenly returned to the public eye. It was a temporary alliance, but a powerful one, with both sides seeing the monumental importance of defeating their Nazi threat. However, as the war ended and the dust settled, Stalin's attitude changed. The brief honeymoon period between the church and the state was, well, it was brief. Yeah, really brief. Post-war, the church once again faced repressions. Clergy were arrested, monasteries shut down, and religious education was curtailed. The church, despite its wartime contributions, found itself walking on thin ice in the Cold War era. So, there you have it. The Russian Orthodox Church's roller coaster relationship with the Stalinist regime, from persecution to alliance and back to persecution. Some might call it a testament, perhaps, to the complex interplay of faith and politics. I think Stalin realised that without the church, the Russians wouldn't fight, and without an army, he would be out of business. Now that sounds surprisingly familiar to me. Yeah. Previously, we dove deep into the tango between Stalin and the Russian Orthodox Church. So now let's venture into an alternative universe. Like it's a hypothetical realm where the Russian Orthodox Church considers canonizing Stalin, turning him into a saint. Firstly, why would the Russian Church even consider canonizing Stalin? Saints in the Orthodox tradition are venerated for their virtuous deeds, miracles, or martyrdom. Stalin isn't your typical icon on the church wall, now is he? One reason could be nationalism. With Stalin, Russia transformed from a rural society to a global superpower. So maybe in our alternate universe, the church wants to harness this patriotic sentiment, connecting faith and national pride. There's also political pressure. The church historically hasn't always been free from state influence, so canonizing Stalin could be a political move, strengthening ties between a government seeking to venerate his memory. Or it might be about rewriting history. Elevate Stalin to sainthood and perhaps his sins get a fresh coat of paint. It's a way to reshape perceptions for future generations. Lastly, reconciliation. Maybe in this hypothetical universe, the Russian Church sees canonizing Stalin as a bridge, mending old wounds between the state and the faith. Saints hold special significance in the Orthodox Church. They're not just historical figures, but spiritual guides. Now, through their stories, believers draw lessons, they find solace, and seek mediation. So how does somebody get canonized in the Russian Orthodox Church? It's not so simple as a thumbs up in a Facebook poll, okay? First, there's an initiation of the cause, where local believers or clergy propose someone for sainthood. Now, for Stalin, this would mean a grassroots support of some sort. Next, an exhaustive investigation begins. A committee would examine Stalin's life, teaching, and potentially any miracles attributed to him. Yes, you heard right, miracles. Miracles like perhaps the Germans being forced back from sacking Moscow in 1942. Or maybe their defeat at Stalingrad on February 2nd, 1943. Then the Holy Synod, the governing body, gets involved. They'll make a judgment, and if they're convinced, the proposal moves forward. Finally, the grand finale of all, the glorification. In a grand ceremony, Stalin would be declared a saint, and his icons painted and his feats celebrated. Now, in the past, I would have said, in reality, the chances of Stalin being canonized are about as slim as a kangaroo becoming Russia's national animal. Alright? But just consider this.
Nowadays, the Russian Orthodox Church has fused with the state. It not only serves the interests of Putin's elites, but also became a part of the government, which is contrary to the Russian constitution.
In our theoretical universe, the Russian Orthodox Church's canonization of Joseph Stalin would be a move as audacious as it would be controversial. Do you agree? Right. As we venture further into this hypothetical scenario, let's discuss the potential public reactions and the global implications, all within the context of advancing the Z propaganda, the Z as we call it in Australia, the Z propaganda in Putin's Russia today. Canonizing is recognizing a person as a saint, right? We've established that, typically for their virtues and a divine connection. Now, placing Stalin in this category would be, to many, a shocking revision of history. Now, at home, in Russia at the present time, the reactions would be polarized. So older Russians, as well as the present Z propaganda push, they hold a certain nostalgia and see Stalin as a figure who fortified the USSR against Nazi aggression, transforming it into a superpower. However, for some others, the shadows of the gulags, the Great Purge, the enforced famines loom large, painting a starkly contrasting picture. But, and here's the big but, in 2023, it's now illegal to raise concerns about this stuff. It's now illegal to raise concerns about these negatives. Prison sentences of 20 years, they can be given. Sentences that large have been given to anybody who speaks up. Protesters may very well end up in the 2020s version of the Gulag. In the rest of the world, this hypothetical canonization would likely be met with astonishment and disbelief. Academics and pro-Ukraine commentators would argue that this is a political move aiming to sculpt a fresh nationalistic narrative under the Z propaganda. Pro-Russia proponents will have false crocodile tears, and the "how dare you insult their faith" bat would be swung around and hit at everybody. On the global front, this hypothetical move strains Russia's diplomatic ties even further, especially with the nations that bear the scars of Stalin's policies or those standing against historical revisionism. Even Russia's current allies would find Saint Stalin a difficult pill to swallow. Presuming, of course, that their religion actually is a religion and not just a political exercise like certain others that we're talking about at the moment. And, of course, there's China. Being communist and brutal towards free religions, they're not going to care which way this thing falls either way. The West, including every non-NATO country supporting Ukraine, is already wary of Putin's move. It could be interpreted as a further resurgence of Soviet-era ideals, further polarising East-West relations. Now, for the supporters of Ukraine, that is no bad thing. On the other side, it could be pretty bad. However, such a canonisation, if it ever took place, would underscore a powerful message. The ability of a regime to influence collective memory to the next level, taking the moulding of it and suiting its specific narrative to the same next step. Our hypothetical canonisation of Joseph Stalin by the Russian Orthodox Church paints a really vivid tableau of potential reactions and implications, but like any complex issue, there's always the other side to the coin. So just for a second, let's delve into alternative perspectives and counter-arguments. First, the Russian Orthodox Church, a body with a long history of spiritual and moral guidance, making such a move might not be purely political, but instead a profound reflection on Russia's turbulent past. To outsiders, Stalin as a saint might seem audacious, yet canonization in many traditions isn't just about purity, but also about redemption and complex legacies. While many might find the idea startling, it's also a reminder of the nuances in interpreting history. We'll take Australian colonial history, for example. It's got its own controversies. The Z propaganda theory posits a deliberate revision of history. But could it also be an authentic attempt by Russia to reconcile its Soviet past, acknowledging its highs and lows? On the global diplomatic stage, could this hypothetical canonization be seen not just as a threat, but also an opportunity? An opportunity to better understand the Russian psyche, providing a platform for dialogue. So instead of polarizing East-West relations, this move could be interpreted as a call for understanding, a plea to remember the pain, the victories, and the complexities of a nation that survived immense hardships. And lastly, while regimes influence collective memory, societies should not be passive. They should engage, debate, and resist official narratives. Now, this hypothetical canonization might motivate the greater apathetic Russian populace and could spark a nationwide introspection. Now, what we've done here is a thought experiment, one rife with interpretations. So, let's pull all of those strings together. At the heart of this discussion lies the power of narratives. Could such a bold move be less about political manoeuvring and more about a nation grappling with its past, aiming for redemption and recognising its complex legacies? Or Would a canonization attempt be seen as an attempt to revise history, aligning it with a specific Z propaganda narrative that's underpinning Putin's Russia? Global reactions to this hypothetical situation could serve as a mirror to our biases and preconceptions. From the streets of Sydney to the halls of international diplomacy, we are in a new era of global political dynamics. Now, a couple of years ago, the idea of Stalin being seen as anything other than a megalomaniacal genocidal maniac, that was left to the pro-Soviet academics and the odd few Russian babushkas who still long for Soviet times. Yeah, right. But now let's leave that alternative universe and take a bit of a time capsule trip back to New Year's Eve, the year 2000. It was a huge global party. Do you remember it? Our family celebrated with a 12-course dinner party on the balcony of my father's house overlooking my hometown of Adelaide, watching all the great live fireworks displays. There was food, family, great friends. And at the time, all we were worrying about was a computer being unable to tell 2000 from 1999. From 2000 onward, Russia, under Vladimir Putin's leadership, saw a series of political events and decisions that seemed indicative of a drift towards a more authoritarian state. So, here's another list. A chronological list of significant events and the actions that highlighted Putin's trajectory from then till now. Number 1, 2003, the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the billionaire owner of the oil company Yukos and a potential political rival to Putin. He was arrested and charged with fraud. This was seen by many as a move to stifle opposition and consolidate control over the nation's vast energy assets. Number 2, 2004. Abolition of direct regional elections. Putin signed a law that ended the direct election of regional governors. Instead, they would now be nominated by the president and approved by regional legislature. Number 3, 2006. The renowned journalist Anna Politkovskaya was assassinated. Now, she was known for criticising the Kremlin, especially concerning the Chechnya conflict. This was the second attempt at her life. They tried to poison her earlier on, but she survived that. Number 4, 2008. Putin, having reached the end of his 2 consecutive terms as president, became Prime Minister under President Dmitry Medvedev. And this was widely seen as a way for him to retain power. Number 5, 2012. Putin returned to the presidency amid significant protests. Following this, the Duma passed laws increasing fines for unauthorised protests. Number 6, 2013. The blasphemy law and the gay propaganda laws were introduced. Now, the Duma passed a law penalising religious blasphemy and another law outlawing distribution of propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships amongst minors. Number 7, 2014. The annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, which was internationally condemned verbally but boosted Putin's domestic popularity no end. Number 8. The murder of Boris Nemtsov. Opposition politician and former Deputy Prime Minister Nemtsov was shot 4 times near the Kremlin. Number 9, 2020 and 2021, is the Navalny poisoning and arrest. Opposition figure Alexei Navalny was poisoned and later arrested upon his return to Russia, leading to nationwide protests and further international condemnation. Number 10, 2022. The invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war. After their annexation of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine saw a military conflict between the government and Russia-supported separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights estimates that 14,200 and 14,400 people, including civilians and military personnel, were killed in that conflict from April 14, 2014 to December 31, 2021. Of them, at least 3.4 thousand were civilians. From the onset of full hostilities in February 2022 to the time of the upload of this video, conservative tallies of deaths among combatants indicate hundreds of thousands dead on both sides, with many, many, many more injured. In addition, the Officer of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights estimates that the number of deaths of civilians or non-armed individuals in Ukraine at more than 8,000 since the start of the war, and many thousands more have been injured. This war, currently, since February 2022, has displaced approximately 6.6 million people inside the country, inside Ukraine, and has caused an additional 6.3 million to flee across international borders. Accusations of war crimes committed by Russian troops run the gamut from indiscriminate shelling of civilians to widespread looting, to the deliberate killing, torture and rape of Ukrainians on a large scale, as well as the abduction of many, many children. Perhaps the most hideous accusations made at the Russians is what they've done to those Ukrainian children. According to the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, on August 27, 2023, there are 503 dead and 1,116 wounded children on record. According to the National Police of Ukraine, 1,159 children are missing. According to the Ukrainian National Information Bureau, 19,546 children have been forcibly displaced. The Russians themselves claim that they have 744,000, and most tragically, the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine reports that 13 children that they have record of have been used. As I said earlier in this video, I'll be making dedicated videos about these alleged abominations very, very soon. Until then, along with this 43, please remember this number, 75. 75,000 Ukrainian children so far have been touched and damaged by Russia's choices. 75, 43. Let's break down what it looks like when a government and the state religion are in bed together. Throughout history, some governments have held hands with religion so tightly it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins.
In 2012, the Patriarch described Putin's political project as a miracle of God. Over the next few years, he became a staunch supporter of the Kremlin's agenda.
That's a bit like letting your footy coach decide the Sunday sermon. From ancient Chinese emperors choosing Buddhist lamas to modern regimes approving religious leaders, yeah, it's quite a sign. Financing the faith. Who's footing the bill?
Even during the times of the Russian Empire, church used to be a full-fledged part of the state, since it was exactly religion, as in all other absolute monarchies, that legitimized the rule of the Romanov family. The Romanovs were sent by God to rule over Russia. This is what the church reaffirmed to the ordinary people. For doing that, the church received a lot of benefits. For example, the government gave much land to the clergymen and monasteries at which they could conduct business activity, The researcher Lubinitsky claims that the Orthodox Church of the Russian Empire owned about 10,000 square kilometers of land, which is about 2.5 million acres. Moreover, the church even had its own peasants who paid tribute to it until the middle of the 18th century. The state and religion existed mutually beneficial. The Orthodox Church legitimized the rule of the Romanov family, and the government gave them the benefits of land tax exemption.
If a government is the primary sponsor, you might find that the pulpit's message aligned pretty closely with the state's agenda. After all, who pays the piper? Have you ever seen a religious text with a government-approved stamp? Or what about iconic murals, like iconic murals on church walls of current political leaders?
Putin himself is trying to be elevated to the rank of a saint. In 2020, an icon of Putin was sold at the airport in St. Petersburg along with the icon of St. Nicholas for $1,300. In the newly built Cathedral of the Ministry of Defense, in 2020, a fresco was made on the wall inside the cathedral featuring Putin and the Ministry of Defense Shoigu. So they really decided to replace the fresco of the saints, which is supposed to be in a holy place, with the fresco of Putin and his elites. What is this, if not elevating them to the status of saints? By the way, there was originally a panel dedicated to the victory of the USSR over Nazi Germany, with Stalin in the same church. The absurdity of having the Mary, mother of Jesus, and Jesus above the communists who made God their enemy is simply astounding.
When states have a say in doctrine, it might be less about the heavens and more about political agendas, don't you think? Let's imagine this. You're ready for your weekly spiritual fix, but there's a government schedule for worship. Feels a bit off, right? Doesn't it? What about Sunday school bake sale to raise money for the soldiers fighting at the front? Not gifts to be sent, but cash to be given to the government for the continuation of the fight.
The fair Everything for Victory took place at St. Nicholas Cathedral in Kislovodsk, where school children and their parents sold baked goods. Blessing the fair, the head of the cathedral and the director of the Orthodox Gymnasium, Father Ian Znaminsky, noted the necessity and importance of the charitable event, which will be a small contribution to the common cause, supporting our soldiers and children of Donbass.
What about when the state dictates when, where, and how religious gatherings happen? Now, they're all massive red flags. Have you ever met a priest who's also a politician? Or what about a priest that fights in the trenches?
Давай. Московская духовная академия и семинары сражается с НАТО. Христос воскресе.
Later, it turned out that the person's name in this video is Pavel Kunitsyn, who has been banned from serving as a priest by the Murmansk eparchy since 2016. However, even after the media drew attention to Pavel after this video shooting RPG, he was not defrocked from his saint rank. This is somewhat, but encouraging his actions by the church.
Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mean a priest that is embedded within the army as the minister there for religious guidance and support. That's something different. I'm talking about a priest that is providing spiritual support but is also drumming the political measurement of the government of the army that's there. When political hats are worn by spiritual leaders, the lines, they get blurred. Don't get me wrong, this isn't to say that all partnerships between church and state are dodgy deals. However, understanding these mutual actions helps us spot when things might lean more towards control than collaboration. Right, so as I draw today's tale to a close, I'm going to invite you to think back. Is it so impossible that the present Russian leadership and Russian Orthodox Church could not put Stalin forward as a saintly Russian cultural hero? History is a prism, and its colours can be cast in any which way, depending on the angle of the light coming in and the way the prism is shifting. The fact that you've watched this video to the end is a pretty good indicator that you feel the hypothetical canonisation of Stalin, if anything, isn't such a fantasy after all. Right, thank yous. Now, above the usual thank yous, I need to say an extra special thanks to a fellow YouTuber, Zac the Russian. When I was about to start the long search for current religious footage that appears in the last section of this story, Zac posted his deep dive on the Russian Church, which is titled Russian Church, the Religion of Peace. A link to that story will be down in the content section below. I suggest you go and have a look at it. The young man has got some very interesting things to say. As for me, thank you very much for spending some time and listening to what I had to say. If you agree with me, then leave a positive comment. If you disagree with me, it's okay. Have your say too. If you have any further information regarding anything mentioned in this video, please contact me via the contact details in the description below. I'm always happy to offer people a chance of rebuttal or the opportunity for them to have their say for the world to hear. Until then, please feel free to buy me a coffee or subscribe to my channel or just give me a like to this video. It all helps me to climb up that crazy YouTube algorithm. One final thing. If you can't remember all of the numbers, all you need to do is just remember two. 43 million at the hands of Stalin, 75,000 Ukrainian children so far, 43.75. 43.75. Cheers. I'll catch you later.